The House That Listened. Evelyn Hayes had always prided herself on her quiet life. A meticulous editor working from home, her days were a comforting rhythm of manuscript pages, strong tea, and the soft purr of her cat, Mittens, curled on the windowsill. It seemed to come from various points. Sometimes the bedroom wall directly behind her headboard, sometimes the living room wall behind the antique bookshelf, occasionally even from the ceiling directly above the kitchen. She'd freeze, listening intently, but it would always stop as soon as she focused. She blamed rodents, an old house with unseen infestations. She called an exterminator, but after a thorough inspection, he found no evidence of pests. "House as clean as a whistle, ma'am," he declared, scratching his head. The scratching persisted. Then came the cold spots, patches of air in specific areas of the house, particularly near the very walls from which the scratching emanated, that would suddenly drop several degrees, chilling her to the bone, even with the heating system working perfectly. The hairs on her arms would prickle, a sensation that made her glance around nervously. She'd checked the windows, the seals, all intact. She blamed localized drafts, a quirk of the house's aging structure. But an unsettling sense of an unseen presence began to take root, a feeling of being watched. A pervasive, cold gaze emanating from the very fabric of her home. The first truly unsettling incident involved her possessions. Evelyn was meticulously organized. Her collection of antique fountain pens, usually displayed neatly on her desk, were found subtly rearranged one morning. Not stolen, not even disturbed, just shifted. One pen, a particularly ornate silver one, was resting perfectly, inexplicably, inside an old leather-bound dictionary on her shelf, tucked between pages describing forgotten architectural terms. She swore she'd never placed it there. She dismissed it as her own absent-mindedness, the stress of a tight deadline. But a small seed of unease was planted. She tried to rationalize it, the house settling, her own imagination playing tricks in the quiet solitude. But the feeling of being watched, the persistent chill emanating from the walls, was harder to dismiss. She found herself unconsciously averting her gaze from particularly silent sections of wall, as if avoiding an unblinking eye. She started leaving a small, bright LED flashlight on her bedside table, not for power outages, but for moments when the shadows seemed too deep, too alive. One night, around 0300 hours, as she was dozing on the sofa, she heard it, a faint, almost subliminal whisper. Her newly purchased Victorian house, nestled on a tree-lined street in a quiet, historical district, seemed the epitome of her serene existence. It was an old house, solid and graceful, with high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and a charming, if somewhat creaky, staircase. It was too soft to discern words, but it seemed to emanate from directly within the living room wall, a sighing, mournful sound, like wind through dry leaves, but with an underlying cadence that felt strangely human. She froze, listening intently. Mittens, who had been purring contentedly on her lap, suddenly hissed, arching her back, her eyes fixed on the wall, her fur bristling. Nothing, just the oppressive silence of the house. He dismissed it as echoes, a trick of the acoustics in the old house. But her sleep grew restless. The anomalies escalated, subtle yet persistent, gnawing at Evelyn's rigid, logical framework. The rhythmic scratching became more distinct, no longer just scraping, but a faint, almost deliberate tapping. Sometimes it sounded like tiny knuckles knocking on the plaster. The cold spots intensified, now accompanied by the faint, cloying sweetness of lilies and damp earth, a scent that would suddenly fill the air before dissipating. It was a smell that spoke of decay in something ancient, utterly out of place in her newly renovated home. The whispers grew louder, clearer. They were no longer indistinct murmurs. They were voices, direct, personal, calling out fragmented phrases in what sounded like Old English, sometimes even a dialect she couldn't quite place, but the tone was clear, pleading, despairing, sometimes angry, and occasionally a word or two in a chillingly precise, accented tone. Cold, below, lost, find us, sleep with us, sleep with us. She heard a child's soft sob, a woman's desperate plea, a man's guttural gasp, always seeming to emanate from within the very walls, echoing through the empty rooms, seeping through the plaster. She gripped the arms of her chair, straining her ears, but they would always fade, replaced by the oppressive silence of the house. She started seeing fleeting shadow figures in the corners of her vision, coalescing for a split second into familiar forms. A small, thin child, a grieving woman in tattered clothes, an old man with hollow eyes, before dissolving back into the darkness. Her own reflection in the antique mirror in the hallway seemed to distort, her features twisting into a fleeting grimace, a look of utter despair before normalizing. It was preying on her mind, twisting her thoughts, trying to isolate her further. She had dismissed the subtle quirks of old homes, the occasional groan of pipes, the settling of timbers, the whispers of wind through drafty windows, as mere character. She believed in the tangible, the explainable, the world she could dissect and refine with a red pen. She was wrong. She developed a slight tremor in her hands, barely noticeable but present. She stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping soundly. Her logical mind, her anchor was slipping. She found herself muttering arguments against an unseen presence, then immediately regretting it, retreating further into herself. Friends, when they called, noticed her gauntness, the dark circles under her eyes. They attributed it to the stress of moving, offered sympathetic advice to take a vacation. No one would believe her. She was truly alone. The entity, whatever it was, knew. It was nurturing her despair, cultivating her isolation. Evelyn began to research the house's history. She delved into local archives, old property records, even dusty, forgotten historical society papers. The house had a dark past, a history of tragedy that had been quietly suppressed. Built in the late 1800s, it had been home to a prominent but reclusive family. Blackwoods. In 1910, the entire family, a couple, their 2 young children, and an elderly relative, had seemingly vanished without a trace. No bodies were ever found, no explanation. The house had stood empty for decades, gaining a local reputation as the Silent House, before being sold multiple times, always quickly, always cheaply. One particularly chilling newspaper clipping from the era mentioned unusual odors and faint sounds emanating from the walls that were dismissed as settling by the authorities at the time. The Blackwood family, it was rumored, had a peculiar fascination with hidden spaces and secret passages within their homes. A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. The children's sobs, the women's pleas, the cold spots, the scent of lilies in decay, the tapping, it was all converging. She looked at the plastered-over doors, the solid, unyielding walls, knowing that behind their surfaces something was waiting. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to understand, to push through the fear, to confront whatever lay beneath, to force it to reveal itself. She felt a desperate need to understand. One particularly cold, wet night, a fierce thunderstorm raged outside, cutting off power to the entire neighborhood. The house was plunged into absolute darkness, broken only by the distant flash of lightning and the mournful wail of the wind. The previous owners had moved out abruptly, a hurried sale that Evelyn had, at the time, attributed to a sudden job relocation. The air grew thick with the cloying sweetness. The scent of lilies and damp earth intensified, almost suffocating. The rhythmic tapping within the walls became a frenzied scrabbling, a sound of desperation and effort. The whispers in the house became a cacophony, a swirling vortex of voices, all of them his, all his anxieties, all his doubts, all the faces he'd lost. And then, from the depths of the hum, a clear, distinct sound. A child's laugh, playful, innocent, yet utterly chilling, followed by that guttural chuckle, now louder, more confident. She stood frozen in the pitch black, her tactical flashlight clutched in her trembling hand. Mittens, curled rigidly at her feet, let out a low, guttural growl, staring intently at the wall in the living room. Evelyn felt the cold spots swirling around her, coalescing, forming indistinct shapes that pressed in on her from every side. And then, slowly, deliberately, she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible groan from the wall, as if ancient wood was shifting. She aimed her flashlight at the wall behind the bookshelf, where the tapping was loudest. The beam revealed nothing but solid plaster. But then, a faint hairline crack appeared, spiderwebbing across the painted surface. As she watched, transfixed, the crack widened, slowly, agonizingly, revealing a sliver of profound darkness behind it. A faint, unearthly blue light began to emanate from the depths of this opening, illuminating the living room in an ethereal glow. Evelyn gasped, her breath catching in her throat, but her eyes were drawn, transfixed, to the abyss. The crack was not leading to solid brick or insulation. Instead, within its depths, a scene was unfolding, not a void, but a glimpse into something else. She saw a vast, impossibly deep, claustrophobic network of narrow passages and cramped chambers, twisting and turning within the very walls of her house, a labyrinth unseen from the outside. The air in this hidden world shimmered with a viscous, dark liquid that pulsed with the same blue light. And within this liquid, hundreds, thousands, millions of faint, ethereal forms drifted silently. They were transparent, barely visible, but unmistakable. Men, women, children, their outlines wavering like smoke. They were dressed in antiquated clothing, their faces blank, their eyes like twin voids. The Blackwood family, and countless others, all lost, all suspended. They floated aimlessly, their faces blank, their eyes like twin voids. Now she sometimes wondered about the faint, lingering scent that permeated certain parts of the house, a subtle, almost cloying sweetness like lilies left too long in stagnant water. She'd scrubbed and aired, but it always returned, a ghost of an odor. And then, in the very center of the vast, pulsating ocean of souls, bathed in the unearthly blue light, a shimmering distortion like heat haze, forming a vague, bipedal figure, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its head too small. Its skin seemed to ripple like water under moonlight. And its face, it was a shifting mosaic of shadows and light, features coalescing and dissolving. But she saw the eyes, not eyes, but two swirling vortices of darkest black, reflecting the dim glow of the scene with an unnatural, hungry gleam. This was the house that listened. Not a ghost, but something far more ancient, something that fed on the echoes of pain, on fear, on the fractured souls of the lost. It was the collective anguish of all those lost souls, trapped and assimilated, forming a singular, hungry entity, the very lifeblood of the house itself. The creature reached out, its impossibly long, slender fingers hovering over one of the ethereal figures of a small child drifting nearby. It didn't touch. It merely beckoned. The voices in Evelyn's mind coalesced, a chorus now, 1,000 alien thoughts, 1,000,000 human fears, all merging, all vying for dominance. They wanted to rest. We offered peace, understanding, freedom. Join us, Evelyn, rest forever in the walls. She watched in horror as the creature in the abyss seemed to inhale, a subtle sucking motion. The ethereal figure of the child wavered, its outline shimmering, before it slowly, inexorably began to drift towards the creature, its form becoming translucent, merging with the swirling darkness of the void where its mouth should be. It didn't struggle. It simply dissolved, a look of placid resignation on its face. Then another figure, an old woman, then a man, all drawn into the shimmering void. The crack in the wall was a silent maw, consuming them. The blue light from the creature pulsed, then intensified, becoming a blinding, invasive blue that seemed to burrow into Evelyn's very being. She felt cold, so cold. And then, a tearing sensation, not physical but profound, as if something was being gently, meticulously peeled from his core. She heard her own scream, distant, muffled, then fading into the terrifying alien hum. Mittens, with a guttural, terrified howl, launched herself at the wall, clawing desperately at the widening crack. Her frantic actions seemed to break the creature's trance over Evelyn. She also noticed the unusually high number of blocked-off internal doors in some of the older parts of the house, particularly on the second floor, doors that led nowhere, simply plastered over and painted. A quirk of Victorian architecture, she'd assumed. With a desperate, primal surge, Evelyn stumbled backward away from the glowing fissure. The light vanished. The crack in the wall remained, a jagged scar but no longer revealing the abyss. The house was once again plunged into the oppressive darkness of the power outage, broken only by the flashes of lightning and the sound of her own ragged breathing. The power returned with a loud thump as the storm began to recede. The house lights flickered on, stark and revealing. The wall was still cracked, a raw, angry fissure where the plaster had split. But the hidden world, the shimmering liquid, the drifting souls, it was gone. Only the cold remained. She grabbed Mittens, her keys, and her phone and ran out of the house into the still drizzling rain, not caring about her belongings, her meticulously crafted life. She didn't lock the door. She just ran into the street, a wild, disheveled figure. She never returned. She put the house up for sale, instructing her real estate agent to list it at a ridiculously low price, refusing to even step foot back inside for a final walkthrough. The agent, a cheerful man named Mr. Davis, called her repeatedly, baffled by her insistence on such a quick, undervalued sale. He put it down to personal issues, the stress of modern life. He'd never believe her. Evelyn lives in a small, modern apartment now in a sprawling, anonymous city. Her windows overlook a concrete jungle, not tree-lined streets. She avoids old houses. She avoids silence. She leaves the television on, always, a low hum of white noise to drown out the others. She checks her reflection endlessly, scrutinizing her own face, half expecting it to distort, to show the void. She refuses to acknowledge any sound that resembles a scratching or a whisper from behind walls. She tells herself it was sleep deprivation, hallucinations, the sheer exhaustion of working from home, the isolation, the stress of an old house finally catching up to her. She repeats it like a mantra, a fragile shield against the terrifying truth. She clings to logic, to reason, but the shield is riddled with holes. From that day, she still remains thinking about it. She feels the faint, inexplicable cold spots, even in the warmth of summer. She sometimes catches the cloying sweet scent of lilies and damp earth on a breeze or in the stillness of the night. She hears faint whispers, just on the edge of hearing, calling her name, promising her oblivion, echoing the ancient voices, the cries of the lost. The first hint of something amiss wasn't a grand, terrifying spectacle, but a subtle shift in the everyday. It began with the sounds. It started subtly, as these things always do, like a barely perceptible tremor in the familiar melody of her quiet days and nights. She scrutinizes the faces of strangers, the expressions of friends, looking for that subtle distortion, that unnatural stillness in their eyes, that hint of ancient knowledge. She knows it's still there, within the walls of her old house. Slumbering, and she knows, with a horrifying certainty, that it carried a piece of her with it, a resonance that was forever altered, forever open to its cold, unblinking gaze. She escaped the house, but she did not escape the entity. She is safe, for now. But she is not whole. She is forever haunted by the chilling knowledge that beneath the familiar veneer of our world, ancient, hungry things lie dormant, or perhaps actively pursue, waiting for the curious, waiting for the isolated, waiting for the fear, forever ensuring that some absences, once experienced, can never truly be filled. And she will always wonder what stories it now whispers from the plaster, what souls it now assimilates, and if, one day, the walls will truly awaken and their vast, hungry maw will open once more, inviting her to join the forgotten in their endless, silent rest. Evelyn, often working late into the evening, began to hear it. Faint, rhythmic scratching, not the frantic skittering of mice or the purposeful gnawing of rats. This was softer, more deliberate, almost a scraping, as if something with very fine claws was gently, patiently dragging itself along the inside of the walls. Thanks for watching. The veil between our world and theirs is thinner than you think. Each like, each share, each subscription strengthens the connection. Feed the channel before it feeds on you.